خریدن تیکت لاتری در اسلام حرام است و اگر کسی برنده شود تکلیف پول اون چیه؟ بازم یه مسئله شرعی. این معمولا آقایون میگن بعد بازم مراجعه کنید به مرجع خودتون ببینید که این مرجع شما درباره مسئله چی میگه. یه رینگی داره.
اگه خواستم پولشون میتونم بدم به ما.
الان این مسئله میگه که چراغی که با خانه رواست به مسجد حرامه. و خودم سرشو میبرم که چرا سر شما بس فتاوایی که موجود اکثر آقایون میگن برای اینکه جایز نیست. اما حالا اگر اومد کسی و این کار رو کرد و خرید، میگن چون مال مخلوط به حرامه، حداقل 2 تا خمس یعنی 40% رو بایستی بذاره کنار و بعدش تازه اونم باید دست به دست بشه که تطهیرش بکنن. اما اکثر آقایون میگن برای اینکه جایز نیست خریدنش. حالا کسانی خریدن و بردن اون بیان نزدیک اینجا که بشه راهی برای فرار ازش بده. برادرز
آقایون سوال سوال از خودم اگه آقایون دیگه سوال ندارن. از شما بعد از بنی امیه که بنی آقا عباس سر کار اومدن تاریخشو خیلی کوتاه میتونید ببینید که چجوری به سر کار اومدن و با ائمه فامیل بودن چجوری رو و چطوری اینو 600 سال تونستن دوباره حکومت بکنن. خیلی خلاصه اگه میتونید این تاریخچه شو بگید.
بنی العباس اواخر دوران بنی امیه یک حالت جنگ داخلی بین خودشون شروع شد. مثل الان حالتی که در عربستان داریم میبینیم بین به اصطلاح پرنس ها، اینهایی که الان نزدیک به قدرت صدا خیلی چیز شد. جنگ قدرت در میان خانواده بنی امیه شروع شد و این جنگ قدرت اختلافات داخلی رو ایجاد کرد و تضعیف کرد قدرت بنی امیه. جنگ های وقتی که بنی امیه
قطع شد میشه به انگلیسی بگیم اکثر حاجرز میخوان انگلیسی بشنون.
The question was a brief history of Bani Umayyah and Bani al-Abbas and how Bani al-Abbas came to power. Bani Umayyah, the beginning of their power starts with Muawiyah's brother, who was appointed by second Khalif Omar as to be the leader of, or at least representative in Sham. And after his death, Muawiyah was appointed, and after the assassination or the killing of Imam Hassan, then Muawiyah became the ruler and the basis for Bani Umayyah. At the beginning, they were united. There was no problem. Around the end of their rule, there were infighting between various clans and family members, as we see it now beginning to happen in the Al Saud family in Arabia. And that infighting created strife and weakened Bani Umayyah. And as a consequence, Bani al-Abbas, which, yes, they were related to Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet. They were descendant to Abbas, or the sons of Abbas, managed to take the opportunity, and they were waiting for their own grab of power, and managed to take the opportunity and challenge or support the uprising against Bani Umayyah and ultimately take control. Safah as the first Khalif, and then Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, and after that went to Harun al-Rashid, Ma'mun, Amin, and so on until the end. Again, the downfall of Bani al-Abbas came with the Mongols, literally with the Mongols, but it doesn't mean that they were fully in charge during all the period that they were there. By the end of Mutawakkil and Mu'tasam and so on, we begin to see the weakness in Bani al-Abbas and the coming to power of the army indirectly. So Bani al-Abbas around the end of their life became nothing more than what the father figure for the whole Islamic empire. But various rulers controlled east and west. And by then it was so fragmented that when Mongols came around 1250, middle of the 13th century, they wiped the whole thing out. And that was the end of Bani al-Abbas. Within few years, the Ottomans, which were again related to the army, the Turkish army that the Bani al-Abbas was using, managed to establish a base for itself in the Anatolia, which is current Turkey, and from then expanded around 1300, only 50 years after, 1299 and 1300. And by 1500, 200 years later, they managed to control literally half of Europe, most of the Middle East, apart from the Persian Empire to the east. And finally, the downfall came in 1922-23 when the British controlled the region and disintegrated the old Ottoman Empire, and Kemal Atatürk literally dismantled the Ottoman rules. This is kind of brief. As Muslim, are we allowed to buy products from a place that knowingly supports human rights abuses, for example, Israel? All scholars have made it clear, any shop that sells anything directly from the Israelis or the Zionists or supports them, it's not allowed to purchase from them. Whether the product of Israel or buy from a shop that willingly or knowingly sells that. So it's for you to make. And by the way, if you go to Google and you type in the code for the Israeli products, they are all identified. One starts with 7449, I believe, and the other one starts with 052 something, but these codes are there. And most Israeli products are used, they have to use this international code. However, recently they have changed. Instead of saying product of Israel, they say product of West Bank. They used West Bank as a pretext, as a cover for them to export. For a while, people were not paying attention to this, and then it became clear that it was Israeli, at least the settlers that were producing and sending them outside. There are now Palestinian products that are coming out with a totally different code. I believe it starts with 8, so you can focus on those. But these two issues, if a shop sells something which is product of Israel, is not allowed. And if the shop has made it clear that they send part of their profit to support the Zionist project, again, it's not allowed to be purchased from them.
I know I have many questions.
Indeed.
But I do have two that kind of piggyback off of...
Sorry, forgive me, sister. Let me see. Since you have asked questions, just for the sake of clarity, if anybody else has any question, let them ask, and then we come back to the sister.
I have one question.
Yes, sir.
Okay, actually there are more than one. One is, I think, I guess related to the question that brother asked about male and female rights in Islam. I think it's just becoming a huge dilemma here.
I can't hear the sister. Bring it closer. Yeah.
So,
If you could bring it closer to you.
So basically, I was wondering if you could speak about, basically akhlaq in Islam and how husband and wife, and towards their children, respect, how much in Islam, and the verses in Quran that they kind of emphasize on that, because I think it's in the community, it's becoming a dilemma. I mean, there are kids that they are sent to foster homes, non-Muslim foster homes, just because of the things that goes on at home. So, based on Quran and Prophet, if you could explain what children's rights are and what our rights are towards the children. So that's one question.
Unfortunately, domestic violence, be it partner to partner or parents to children has become one of the, let's call it, as you said, crises within the Muslim community. I remember days where lawyers in Denver would, can we get the echo out of here?
It's your microphone. It's you have two that are on.
Let's see if now it's better. There's an echo. Indomie? There were days where lawyers would come to Islamic Center and ask, why is it that children in Muslim communities are exemplary and they don't commit anything which is legally could be problematic. But within the last 10 years, unfortunately, this has changed. Now we have in Colorado Muslim Shia children in prisons, involved in prostitution, drugs, you name it, they are there. When we talk about violence, there are two types of violence that we have to separate from each other. And they both come under domestic violence. The violence towards partners, men towards women, and sometimes women towards men, and parents towards children. Parents towards children, now there are legal protection for the children that would not tolerate any kind of violence against children. And automatically, once, by the fact that a parent or parents become violent towards their children, they disqualify themselves to become a parent. If one partner becomes violent, then it becomes the responsibility of the other partner to look after the child. But the legal or the law would make it impose a condition that the violent partner would not come anywhere near the family as a whole. So the consequence is the breakup of the family. We have nothing in Islam that would justify violence against either in the first form, which is against one's partner or against children. Where the confusion lies is, as far as the children, is how do we discipline our children. Unfortunately, we tend to repeat the same mistake as our parents, because for them hands-on approach in disciplining the children was the only way available. If you said anything, you got smacked. So we have taken that principle and we try to implement it in our lives. The notion that there are other ways of disciplining a child without having to resort to violence is not there because of the lack of education. But as far as domestic, there are causes that one could find. Most of it comes down to psychological and frustration in this life, where they take revenge of what's happening outside, either on their partner or on their children. They take revenge on the kids or the partner. I have heard quite a lot about California and particularly Los Angeles community, that how, particularly within the Iranian community, that it has literally shattered the old relation that exists, and primarily due to material life. And this material life comes to impose itself and creates its own frustration in the mind of the father, the mother, and so on, and the poor children become the target of the anger. We have nothing in Islam that will justify it. As a matter of fact, there are books that clearly defines this relation of responsibility. There is a book which is called The Right, Kitab al-Huquq, from the fourth Imam, Imam Kazerooni, that goes into detail, where identifies parents' rights, husbands' rights, wife's right as well as children's right. And there is nowhere within these books that clearly reserves the right for the parents to use violence against their partners or commit any kind of violence, which is called domestic violence. It's not Islam, it's something else. And primarily you see this more and more in communities that the linkage to Islam has been broken down, and as a consequence the linkage to what we call cultural issues are broken down as well. Totally secular, totally westernized. These are the ones that primarily have these crises, although saying that there are others that are beginning to move in because they are being influenced by it. But we don't have anything in Islam that says you can be violent to your partner or to your children.
So in continuation of that,
Use the microphone, please.
so then that brings up another question. Like I said, there are a lot of kids that are being put in foster homes, non-Muslim foster homes. How would that work if a Muslim parent accepts another Muslim child with this adoption and like mahram, no mahram, boy or girl? How would that work?
Well, there are different, now we are moving towards what we call the social obligation that we have, and the structure that we should have organized in our life that would compensate for such events. When a child is taken out and put in a foster home, normally if there are no, well, it's a temporary arrangement. It requires legal precedent or legal judgment. If there are no families coming forward from the community itself, approaching the department, the necessary social science, social department or the court or anybody else, we have a couple of cases where Muslim families in Colorado came forward regarding a particularly Iraqi family that due to violence was, they had to go through this. If no family comes forward from the community itself, then the law passes the responsibility to social services. And the social services would have to give these children to their known foster parents. It becomes out of the parents' control. Particularly when there are drugs involved, and if the court could establish that both parties are engaged in it, then definitely they would lose the child or children. What we did in a couple of cases was to ask families that did not have children, and they accepted the responsibility. In a few cases, even they had children, and they accepted the responsibility, and they became the temporary foster parents. Because in some court cases, parents that have been disqualified by the court would be given a reprieve period. Say if they were going to go through cleansing and education and so on, say 1 year, 2 years of probation, etc., then they can approach the court. In such temporary arrangement, Muslim families can come forward, and particularly with young children, and they don't have to even think about the implications when they get older and become baligh. The issue is when it's a permanent order, and Muslim families intend to bring these children into their families for as permanent as one could imagine. Then there are a number of issues that one has to deal with. And from a Sharia perspective, there are ways out that one could use a concept of mahramiyah and so on. But that is not the primary issue at this stage. How do we prevent that? The primary challenge is how do we prevent our community from reaching that stage? Because once you get entangled into the legal system, it has a totally different way of thinking from the community's way of thinking. So I would recommend communities, as they organize themselves, to have a number of people on their list as possible temporary foster parents that they could use, particularly with regard to younger children, and then use them as the case might be. Why Los Angeles has made a kind of this image for itself, it's because not only the number, the spread, it covers huge, not just the Iranian community, other communities that have fallen into the same trap.
آقا یکی از نوشته ها اینجا خانم رویا افشان یه سوالی
I think
داره. بعد یکیشون نخونید.
Yeah, I'm going to answer this question and then probably one more question and then that's it, because I have a lecture in about...
She has written that.
Yeah, okay. Which one?
She's written that one of the books.
Which one?
The one about mental illness.
The mental illness.
Mental illness, this one, okay. How does Islam view mental psychological health issues? How can they be solved? Broadly speaking, sister, mental health or psychological issues could be divided into two broad groups. One is what I call self-inflicted, as a consequence of a way of life that an individual chooses. One becomes alcoholic, drug user, etc., etc., and naturally has consequences, that's one type. Psychological impairment due to some physiological crisis, mental illness, etc., etc. Then there are experts that one has to refer to them. I'm not quite clear exactly what you mean by what Islam says about it.
Do you want the disorders, or like Dua Joshan Kabir, it's about so many physical pains, right? Or there's so many duas for physical problems, but there's nothing about like depression or like bipolar or like scholars never speak on it. So I was wondering, is it taboo, or is it just something that's not really
certain. You see, the point that I was going to raise tonight, one part of one's experience in life that teaches one is the positive and the negative experiences that we have to face, the challenges that we have to go through. People who are ill-prepared to face these challenges, as soon as they face what they consider to be a calamity, they move into some kind of depression and withdraw. Certainly there are du'as, prayers and so on that would, at least in the sense that it would encourage that individual. Depression comes when one feels that all the doors are closed. That's the first step. So to open the window that the doors are not closed, there is another agency here that works with you. The dua as well as prayers are used to convince the person that, look, we are not here by ourselves. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with us. The person who is most loving and compassionate is not going to abandon us. That's the basic step in this psychology of dua and prayer. If it is not out of depression or mental issue, primarily depression or a crisis out of a way of life, then you are going to go into more permanent feature that comes under the category of depression. Well, this is not just simply, a psychological issue. This is not simply a depression. It's a psychological issue that fundamentally something is wrong and one has to deal with it. As far as the self-inflicted one, again, social structure, families, and all other organizations to support an individual that for a mistake or others have fallen through into bad habits, to support them and bring them up. Those who go beyond this, and the other category that there is a physical, mental impairment within them, then we have to rely on the expert to see what they advise, and Islam supports it. So as far as the depression that comes due to facing challenges in one's life, or calamities and so on, it may lead to withdrawal and some kind of psychological issue, but can be treated by creating this relational kind of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you.
So your solution for someone who feels like there's so many people that go to the doctor nowadays and it's just prescription medication for things, or even if you're raising a child, if the doctor's saying, oh, they're bipolar, or oh, they're autistic, or so many things that they're calling disorders nowadays, you think people should just go to their marjas? Or like how?
I mean, if there are medical reasons, specifically, medical reasons for something, dua by itself is not going to substitute for the medical treatment. If somebody has cancer, for argument, you can't sit at home and I recite Surah Yasin and I expect that my cancer, the tumor is going to disappear. The rational argument is seek advice from an expert, from a specialist, and see what they recommend. Here again is the same thing. Depending on the steps or the category that you put somebody in, some support and helps are needed. If it is purely depression from